How closely have you tracked Donald Trump's recent comments on the conflict?
I've seen them. I think, as with anything that Trump says, one takes them seriously at your own peril.
Hmm.
He's perfectly capable of saying one thing in the morning, its exact opposite in the afternoon, and then offering yet a third opinion on precisely the same topic after dinner. What the only reason I would find his comments interesting if I recall correctly, he said that Israel risks losing support and should call a ceasefire. Again, as I said,
Well, he didn't exactly say ceasefire, but he said
yeah, something
they should
along those
finish the
lines.
job and wrap it up. Those were basically his
Yeah,
words.
but I think he then made additional comments about Israel losing public support in the U.S. or globally. The only reason I would find those interesting is that apparently, regardless of what he actually thinks, that Trump apparently finds it in his political interest and his electoral interest to make statements like that, which is absolutely not something that would have been expected of him 5 or 10 years ago. And it's a phenomenon I think we're seeing more and more in Western politics, where establishment politicians who traditionally have seen loyalty to Israel and blind support for its policies as a political and electoral asset are now increasingly, um, uh, gradually to be sure, but increasingly taking positions which suggest that they find Israel to be a potential political and electoral burden, and that distancing themselves from Israel may well prove to be a political and electoral asset. It's a slow, gradual, but I think highly significant process to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump, unlike Biden, has actually very few ideological commitments. He's very transactional. I think certainly on the issue of Israel, he's pretty purely transactional. If you're in the Republican Party, especially today, given the political shifts you're talking about, that transactional math always adds up to ironclad, do whatever Israel wants. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Both, as I was saying, the white evangelical Christian base is very much pro-Zionist, very much in favor of even this current iteration of the Israeli government. Trump received significant campaign contributions last time around from Sheldon Adelson, who is very committed to the cause. So that transactional math typically adds up, not typically, like uniformly adds up to ironclad support of Israel. But I'll just read you a little bit of that quote that you're referring to so people get the full sensibility and you can react to it if you have any additional comments. But he was asked about Chuck Schumer's recent comments calling for a new government after the war is over, which, provoked a lot of outrage in Israel. And so he was asked about it and he said, I think it's a terrible thing to do because it takes all of your momentum away. But then he goes on to say, you don't have the support you used to have. Some 15 years ago, Israel had the strongest lobby. If you were a politician, you couldn't say anything bad about Israel. That would be like the end of your political career. Today, it's almost the opposite. He then goes on to sort of like rant and rave about AOC and Rashida Tlaib. Then he goes on to say, and 15 years ago, that would have been unthinkable to be doing that. So Israel has to get better with the promotional and with the public relations, because right now they're in ruin. They're being hurt very badly, I think, in a public relations sense. Just like classic Trump, that, it's not a problem that they're slaughtering civilians, except that it's creating a bit of a PR headache for them, right?
And no one understands self-promotion like Donald Trump. So if he's saying these things to the government that prior to the Biden administration, he had done more to support than any U.S. President before him, well, it's worth taking note of that. There's a tradition now dating back, I think, to the late 60s or early 70s, if not earlier, that every time a U.S. administration leaves office, they're always described as the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House. And it's always been true that every successive U.S. administration has done even more for Israel than its predecessor. But given the issues we've been discussing, Biden's extraordinary passionate attachment to Israel and these broader changes that we've been discussing, it may well be that Biden's successor may be the first US president about whom we cannot say he's been the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House. If I could just make one brief comment about white evangelicals, I think what you say about them is generally correct. Although I've also seen some research to suggest that there is also a generational shift occurring within that demographics ranks as well, and that younger white U.S. evangelicals, although by no means staunch advocates of Palestinian rights, seem to be much more coy about this kind of brazen celebration of Israeli legality than their parents.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.